Hey, how are you?
Good, man. I was thinking it must be a real pain in the ass dealing with flaky prima donna assholes like me.
I don't know anything about that.
Well, I bet you do. I bet you have it quite often.
No.
Us movie people, we're treated like kings and children.
Pampered.
Right to our heads. It's like, we don't owe anybody anything. You owe us everything.
Well, I'm just glad you decided to agree and...
You mean condescend to talk to you?
Exactly. Well, have you ever done a podcast before?
No, I have not.
Oh, really? Have you been asked?
Not to my knowledge.
Uh-huh. Well, it just comes as a surprise.
Oh.
You
probably think I'm a lot more in demand than I really am.
Honestly, I know we're joking around, but you're in demand right now. Secondly, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter even the slightest to me.
Good, because it doesn't matter to me.
There you go.
Well, this is an interesting thing about how I became so disillusioned and alienated from the process of movie making out here.
Mm-hmm.
I have a whole rap about it that has a lot to do with me. But if you wanted to start recording, or are you already?
It is on, but having said that, if there are things that come up that you like an issue or you regretted saying something...
No. It has nothing like that. It really has to do about the style of movie making that becomes like the dominant style of filmmaking, and how little I can identify with that, and how I felt like I became trapped in that. Mm-hmm. And that I can bring up in direct, in a relationship to some other stuff I say, so I can make that point really clear in relation to something specific.
All right. Well, also let me tell you, like, the people that listen to this podcast are, they're people that, I think, interested in art making, and of making something important. And I think that you're probably experienced like like an arc, where you were start off with that back when you were starting off your acting career anyway, that you could actually make something artful and important, and it actually gets seen by tons of people. And it seemed like it was a priority to make films like that, at least on some level. And then that has changed a great deal.
What changed?
Like just making an artful film, a film that really says something, and that could be made, not for millions and millions of dollars, and that a lot of people would see, and there would be a certain amount of discussion and attention around films like that. And again, they didn't have to be blockbusters necessarily. They didn't have to be these huge films, but they were still like on the radar of a lot of people.
Are you talking about Howard the Duck?
Hey, it's built a cult following, I think.
Well, let me address that, because I think to us, I'm not sure what the other people feel, like Jim and John and Esther from Stranger in Paradise, but it wasn't so much about the artfulness of it, although I think we were all very interested in that and the style we were doing it, and we weren't trying to be unconventional in any way. I think we were working within our means, and I think Jim, to his credit, realized that both in his artistic outlook about how to make films, or not artistic, more like aesthetic outlook about, choices that he made in terms of where to put the camera, how to move the camera, in that case, how to forgo editing, which was both an aesthetic choice and a choice that he made out of necessity, because when we first did it, we did the first part in 1982.
Right. It was
that was.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go on.
I was going to say it was like a short.
It was a half-an-hour short that really encompassed the first part of the movie, and it ended the first part of the movie, which we did with no expectation of doing anything else, ended with Esther leaving New York. I think the second to last scene was I ran into her on the street where she was taking off the dress that John so generously gave her, and she was taking off because she hated the style, and that's when I found out she was leaving, and then she left, and then I go up to the apartment, John and I, Eddie
and Willie.
Willie and I, Willie and I drink beers without ever saying anything, and basically,
gotcha. Right.
And what was interesting about that last scene is that we actually improvised a scene in which there was dialogue, and I came into the scene and I forgot my dialogue.
Oh, I see.
And I was supposed to have the first line. So having forgotten the dialogue, I decided, okay, I just won't say anything and play the awkwardness of the moment of both having forgotten my line or thread of the conversation we were going to do, and play that awkwardness of both forgetting those lines and the fact that, well, really, we didn't have anything to say to each other at that point. So it worked, and that's what I think. We did a couple others in which we actually talked, but
that one worked the best.
That one worked the best, and it's interesting that in that type of situation in which we were inventing the dialogue and inventing the scene itself before we actually shot, although we had rehearsed a couple of weeks or months before. I remember up in Jim's apartment, some like 5th floor walk up in Little Italy. And I remember, as opposed to my place, which was also like a 5th floor walk, but more in the East Village, his place was spotlessly clean. I couldn't find whitewashed floors and whitewashed walls. It was like, oh yeah, well, you can live a bohemian life without being a slob. So,
he was like a minimalist in that way.
He was a minimalist, really clean, I remember.
Wow.
And, I think it reflects in his movies and the way he dresses.
Yes.
He always dresses in black, but it's always perfectly put together.
Yeah. Makes sense. You're right. He had an aesthetic. You're right.
Yeah. Once he took that short to 2 festivals. I think it was Rotterdam and Berlin, in which he won awards in both. We won awards in both. And at the Berlin Film Festival, he met this, I don't think he was a producer at that point. He wanted to be a producer. He was some kind of businessman, Otto Gruckenberger, who turned out to be the producer of the executive producer of the rest of Strangers. When he offered Jim, I think it was another $100,000 to complete it, make it into not complete it, just make it into a real movie. I mean, not a real movie, into a feature,
like a feature-length film.
And that's how that was our
origin of. That's the origin of how it became a feature.
That's the origin and the impetus of making the second and the third part. But I remember there was a question about, okay, so how, Jim approached us, and he told me after he won the Berlin, and what a great opportunity, and he was saying that the problem is, not the problem, it's like, how do we get you guys out of New York? You have no money, and
oh, right.
How do we get you to go to Cleveland? That was his idea. We would go to Cleveland and visit
Ava.
Ava. That's right.
Yeah.
Ava. And we would visit Ava in Cleveland, but how are we going to get out? And I was like, we could win the money in a poker game. And Jim was like, perfect. And that was that's not the beginning of the second part, but that was the scene, I think the first scene after the scene where we're sitting in the room, not talking to each other.
Right. Where you forgot your dialogue, etc. We remember now.
Yeah, but nobody knows that.
No, of course not. Now they do, but yeah.
And now they do. I have no problem, revealing it to the there's two or three people who might be interested in that.
Or who might be listening, yes.
But so that was the scene that started off. Well, it didn't start off, and then we got the money. There was a scene in the hallway, and then we're in the car. We stopped, some dude who's waiting to get on the bus. This kind of working stiff guy, and John Willie makes fun of him for being a working stiff, and he gets all hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And that was I think that was the end or the beginning of the second part. I think that was the end of the first part. But what I want to say about what you said about the artistic nature of the movie was that I think we were more involved with the process of making the movie than
mm-hmm.
with figuring out what kind of artistic statement or what kind of
sure.
what we're doing in terms of film and film history. And
right. No, I get it. I guess my feeling was like you started off saying, Richard, you started saying that, and correct me if I misinterpreted you, but I thought you were saying you were just somewhat disenchanted with mainstream film. And what I was trying to get at was that you weren't even you were a musician, right? You weren't even an actor until Jarmusch, I assume, cast you in Stranger Than Paradise. So like you kind of just came upon this career where you just lucked into, and I mean lucked into in terms of your place in it. I'm not talking about maybe the rest of the...
No, totally. I think that's totally correct.
And it turns out you didn't just luck into, let's say, Howard the Duck, I mean, as you joked about, but, the truth is you lucked into a series of films at the right time. Just you have that in your history. And so I'm wondering if maybe because it just turned out that particular time was just very, in retrospect, looking back at it, was really just a time where there were so many wonderful films like that, quirky films and unusual films that were commercially successful and that a lot of people got to see. Whereas nowadays it's not there. You have to kind of do different types of films to make a living and for a lot of people to see them. That's all.
I totally agree. Though I disagree on 2 points that you were saying before, that the independent film world at that time really offered a lot of opportunities to explore different avenues and different ways of making films, and it kind of ended at a certain point. Yet there still seems to be a somewhat healthy independent film
industry. Sure.
Thank you very much. There seems to be a kind of vibrant independent film industry, but I see almost nothing that I like at this point, because what I was saying before, I don't know if you were recording it, but that the style of movie making, and I cannot think, honestly, of any other movie that I became disenchanted very quickly. And I never really understood why, because I always thought 2 things. One, these were great opportunities for me. I love the process of making film. I like the kind of instant family that is created on a movie set, especially if you have a larger role, so you're around a lot longer. If you have a 2-day role, you really can't get into that feeling. But if you're there for either the duration or for a significant amount of time, you can, that element of filmmaking and I shouldn't leave out the money that you can make, especially when you're working in high-end films. But I became disenchanted. I think I realized this recently, is that the kind of work I was doing, the kind of characters I was playing, had nothing to do with the kind of idea that I had for characters and for ways of film acting. And the distinction I make is that the way I approached Stranger Than Paradise and the way I approached film acting was on a much more physical, gestural, behavioral, full body level in which you yourself is represented more by your movements and your expressions and the way your body and your face can express a different kind of feelings and emotions that you're going through, that the story puts you through.
I see.
And excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
And that the dominant mode of filmmaking these days is with the character usually in close-up on their face, telling the story through dialogue and expressing the conflicts within the story, mostly through dialogue.
I see.
Told with each other, and
I know what you're getting at. Yeah, go ahead.
And never having felt either that comfortable with that, or feeling the constrictions of that style, and feeling basically it shouldn't be the only way of telling film stories, and in fact, it doesn't use the visual to its maximum advantage.
I see.
And I don't mean cinematography,
right,
because Hollywood cinematography is fantastic. But any of the creative side of filmmaking, besides acting and story, is, in Hollywood, that's all the production value. So the costume designers are fantastic, the set designers are fantastic, the sound people are fantastic, the cinematographers are fantastic. Every creative element of film is fantastic, except, to me, that's mostly window dressing. It's not the least important element, but it shouldn't take precedent over the storytelling and the style of acting. But saying that, so right away, all the movies I was in, including Out of the Dog, Platoon, even Platoon, a lot of that, unfortunately for me, I wasn't in a lot of the battle sequences, so
you were ultimately blown up, though, right?
I was blown up pretty quickly. I was the second person killed.
Well, talk about a physical performance. Come on.
Yeah, but there was a lot of dialogue.
That's true. Well, it's Oliver Stone. Yeah.
A lot of, and he's good. He's really good. I really respect that guy, and well, at least back there. but he did have a visual approach to telling the story, and I don't think there was all that much like going right for the close-up and right for the way the close-up magnifies the character and creates this kind of identification with the character. Instead of watching a story unfold, you're forced into this empathetic position, and you see yourself in those type of roles. And to me, that's not interesting storytelling, and you end up not telling interesting stories. You end up telling you're basically hero stories. And it follows a very set series of
conventions. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. It appears like you didn't plan on being an actor because you were a musician originally, right?
I was at that point. I was writing, I was playing music, and I was taking photographs. Those are the three things that I still do. And then when about 10 years ago, when I was just so fed up with the state of filmmaking and the lack of opportunities or the lack of recognition of what I could bring to it, and also that it was, when I look around, and it's just very much a style that's not even considered I think for some reason it's really come from TV.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
And I don't know why that film has to take its cues from television.
More than ever. You're right. I mean, look at the
now more than ever.
Right. Look at where it's going.
TV by its nature has to have close-ups and has to have storytelling that is based upon the convention of dialogue and expressing the drama through the dialogue.
And it's a writer's medium, right? Historically, so therefore, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on dialogue, right?
But that didn't happen until sound movies came in. And my understanding of that is they had no precedent for sound. So where did they go? They went to the theater. Mm-hmm. And the theater being such a writer's medium and...
You mean like stage? You mean like stage?
Yeah, stage.
Mm-hmm.
And since so much of that is, like I said, a writer's medium, and since it's a writer's medium, it's also a dialogue-driven art form. Mm-hmm. So, all of that stuff from the 30s, all the Cary Grant, Mae West, and I mean, they're funny movies. Even the Marx Brothers, who are ridiculously funny. But so much of that is based upon these kind of vaudeville routines in which, people just yacked it up.
Were you really? I was going to ask you that before. When you were a kid, what kind of movies were you watching? Were you always were you into the Marx Brothers and the silent movies, or at least the more physical performances?
Well, speaking of that, I've been recently going back to silent movies to see how they did it. I wrote and produced a little silent film that unfortunately got rejected from Tribeca and Sundance and South by Southwest.
Bastards.
So the triple whammy smacked me down. People really loved it, but I guess maybe they were just my friends.
I want to tell you, there's a friend of mine. He made a movie called Towheads. Have you ever heard of it?
What's it called?
Towheads.
No.
You should check it out. I think it's you can. I don't know what you got as far as streaming and all that business, but she made this movie about 2 or 3 years ago. I met her. Derek C. in France, who is he made Blue Valentine and The Place Beyond the Pines. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, he's one of the guys. There's only 2 guys I've seen recently
mm-hmm.
that are using that much more visual style.
He's one of them.
And
right?
interesting.
Well, and yeah. He's one of these guys, right?
Yeah, and Ryan Gosling, interesting enough, was in the other guy's film, Drive. I forget his name.
Oh yeah, Drive, of course. The
Danish guy.
Yes, I'm blanking for a second, but I know what you're talking about. Anyway, but his wife. Well, first of all, Derek and his wife Shannon sent their kids. My kid was going to the same school, so our kids were in the same class, and that's the way it is living in Brooklyn. And his wife is named Shannon Plumb, and she makes all these experimental films, and then she made a feature, and she's now going on to make another one. But it was called Towheads, and it's almost like an homage to this, like Charlie Chaplin, even though she's this sort of tall blonde woman. She's very goofy and unusual, but she also had made all these experimental shorts, which is you can watch on our website, and so you should check her out. I'll send you that information. But it sounds like she's kind of in the same state where she's kind of really go ahead. Yeah, she's really kind of into the physicality of performance on film, and so of course she too struggles with, getting the film out, getting it seen. But Towheads did okay it was at New Directors, New Films, and here in New York at which is MoMA, which is pretty prestigious. So it did okay.
What was her name?
Shannon Plumb, Plumb, and her husband is Derek C. in France. Right? Is there a B? I think that with a B at the end though.
Okay,
Yeah. Check her out, her stuff on her website, and then I can get you a copy of Towheads if need be. But I think you really dig her. Yeah, like I said, she's married to Derek.
Shannon Plumb. Oh, okay, I have her.
Shannon.
I think there's a bunch of her shorts on YouTube.
Yeah, there are. I'm sure there are. I'm sure she puts them on there too. Yeah. Well, she probably puts them on there and then embeds them on her website. But you were saying that you recently were showing some of your work in, was it in Houston, Texas? Like some of your more experimental things? Is that what you were telling me?
Yeah, it was an art festival called Luminaria. And it's pretty interesting festival. Unfortunately, the original date, I think, was September 19th or the 22nd. And there was some monster hurricane that's coming up the coast of Mexico, the East Coast, and it was threatening San Antonio, and it did flood the whole city, and so they had to cancel half of the program, or that the half that was going to be outdoors, and the other half was in the San Antonio Museum, which is a converted beer factory, and they did this pretty amazing job. And now this time, they kind of organized it for the outdoor people, which was strange because, I mean, for me, because experimental films, they wanted to project these large on the side of a building, and I think experimental films tend to be a lot more intimate than it's something that should be displayed outdoors. And so we went back down. I convinced them, instead of projecting it, to get monitors to view it, also because I shot it in kind of a very old digital format. When did I? It's like 2005, 2006, when digital cameras just began to come out, and they just began to reach a level of sophistication.
But is it a consumer brand, or was it?
The Sony. And I think it was kind of one of those prosumer, beautiful little camera.
Gotcha.
And an incredible sound. And I just go around, like, shooting. There was a preacher that used to preach every Saturday morning right in back of my building. He's an amazing preacher. He'd be playing with a little band. He used to do this thing where he would preach, and the guitar player playing kind of bluesy type.
He was playing blues.
He was playing a blues type guitar, electric guitar.
Okay, I got you.
And he was accompanying the preacher, but he would also kind of comment during the pauses. And
sure, like call and response type stuff.
It was kind of like a call. It was pretty amazing. So it used to infuriate a lot of people in the building, but I was always kind of into it. And then I took the path down there and just filmed it for 2 weeks. And they didn't really like it, and they used to point me out. It's like, Jesus is also for you. And for some reason, the blood of Jesus, that was their major hit. And it was like, and something about the Holy Spirit and the blood of Jesus. And I named the film I've Been Denied, because at the end of the film, or one of the street guys, I live in a section of town that's kind of Skid Row, kind of Skid Row.
Downtown L.A.
Yeah, it's officially named Skid Row.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, and so one of the street people who wandered into the fell onto the ground and started moaning and screaming, I've been denied, which to me, man, he tried to get religion, but he's been denied. Now, it was interesting because the preacher, there were two of them, came over and kind of did their little preacher thing, putting their hands on the guy and praying for him, but it didn't hurt. It didn't do anything at all. And it was funny. The preacher just shrugged and was like, "All right, what can you do?" But that was like one of them, and I did some more abstract ones, and then I did some more kind of narrative ones, like a ghost story. A friend of mine had a house up in upstate New York, and it was from the 1890s, and she was sure it was haunted. And I had met this guy who was a real life ghost
hunter, kind of
ghost hunter, yeah. And he brought two of his friends out there, and I invented this ghost and So we had a lot of fun. That for 2 days we shot upstate, and the woman whose house it was also growing marijuana in the back, so she had a big bowl of marijuana. I think we stayed high the entire time, which is probably not recommended, but we ended up putting together a nice little 5-minute movie that I included within that program. But
very good. And
you're interested.
I totally, yes. I totally would love to see it. Of course, yes, I totally would. As a matter of fact, today I reached out to a friend who he's an experimental filmmaker, and his name is Richard Sandler, and he's here in New York. I don't know. He's lived in the East Village, I'm sure. I think he lived in Times Square for a long time. Anyway, he shot a lot of stuff around New York City, and then in Los Angeles. And anyway, he's moving. I guess he's leaving New York City in the next few weeks or so, moving.
Oh no!
Moving upstate.
LA?
No, he's moving upstate. He's an older guy now. Not old, but older.
Okay. Anything but Los Angeles.
Yeah. Oh well. Well, I'll look forward to your coming back when you can arrange it, when you can afford to.
I definitely plan to. But
well, you know what? It's funny because when
what kind of experimental films did he do? More narrative? Or more
I'll send you. It says also write down his name, Richard Sandler. He's got a website too. You can see everything he's done. He would shoot like on the subways, and he would shoot like on Times Square, and sort of kind of like Charlie Ahern. You know that guy?
Yeah.
You know, kind of just very street level documentary verite shooting stuff.
Okay. Yeah. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, me too.
I like the abstract stuff too. When I did a couple, but yeah, the real world based kind of stuff is something I'm more drawn to.
I was living in Boston when in the 80s when The Stranger came out, and I'm not going to dredge up the entire anecdote again about how, because I keep doing it, how I accidentally walked into the wrong movie and ended up seeing Stranger in Paradise, which kind of changed my whole outlook on film in an hour and half. But when I moved back to New York City not long after that, I remember sometime later I saw you a few times. So I guess it would have been either late 80s or into the 90s, because I lived like on East 15th Street. And I think I saw you like the McBurney once or twice. I don't remember exactly the circumstances, but I was too shy to say hello to you, even though I was like, oh my God, it's that guy. Well, I lived in the East Side, but not quite the East Village, just in the Gramercy.
No, you said you saw me where?
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw you. I remember at least one time. I think for a short time I belonged to the McBurney Y, in Chelsea. And I think I saw you there.
Wow, that must have been much later than that. Because
maybe so.
The only time I remember going there, God, I think it was early 2000s.
Oh, even as recently as that? Yeah,
I think that's the only time I ever went there. Because my sister... No, you can go there. You can go there 6 times. I'm a member of the Y.
Oh, I got you. So you were a guest.
Yeah, I was a guest.
I probably was too.
Oh, wait. You're talking about the McBurney on Houston, or the original one on 20?
No, the original. Yeah, the original one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I used to go there quite a bit. Yeah.
Okay, but you were a downtown guy, and so was I for the most part, and so. But then I wasn't, even. I think if it was in the 2000s or even the late 90s, I would have been working in the music industry, and I probably just didn't have I was probably too shy to approach somebody who I didn't know like you.
Well, I think one of the things that I really appreciated when I first got into the movies is that I'm pretty shy too. So I'd go to parties, and then lots of people would come up to me. And I was like, "Oh, this is cool. Now I can relax at parties, and I don't have the pressure of going up to people I didn't know."
No, and also because your persona, if you were a little shy, it was okay because it just kind of was amusing. It was part of your persona already,
Well, this is interesting you should say that. And from my point of view, I'm not sure if other actors have this point of view, but I think it's probably true, whether they acknowledge it or not, is that depending on the part you use, the part of yourself that can best express that character. So that, since I'm shy, I can use that in a certain character. But in other ways, I'm very assertive.
Right.
So
yeah.
You could take that element just off the table for certain characters. I know you're not going to be assertive. This guy is totally not subservient, but more passive.
Mm-hmm.
Like my character in Stranger in Paradise. And it was clear to me that, okay, that's the way you can do it and not worry about all the different elements of the character, because you already decided that, okay, this is basically the character, so you're reacting to everything else, the other characters and the storyline, within the confines of that decision you made about that character. So it gives you kind of a real strong hook to hang the character on. And it doesn't define the character in the way they're going to react to everything, but it informs that reaction.
I guess Vito, your character in Do the Right Thing, wasn't particularly shy, for one example.
That he wasn't shy.
Right, he was not shy.
Yeah, exactly. And which was fun, because even though he was the much more sympathetic character in that story, I could give a certain twist. I think to be in a family like John Turturro and Danny Aiello, who were both extremely assertive characters and animated characters, and that's, I think, their nature. So it was okay, I'm part of this family, but I also reject parts of the family, and I'm not shy about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of informed the choice of, also that he's an Italian guy, he's basically a neighborhood guy, and I mean, you could have played it shy. I mean, Martin Scorsese was a neighborhood guy, but basically he had asthma and stayed in the house all the time and fantasized about movies.
Right.
So, he's not exactly shy, right?
Did you never worked with Scorsese, did you?
No, but I had this interesting audition with him, which, funny enough, it was for the Color of Money.
Oh, wow.
The Paul Newman movie, and there's that character who is the rival. I think they had 3 or 4 scenes, and ironically, John Turturro got the part. But I remember going for the audition, and it was some high-priced hotel in Midtown New York on the 32nd floor, and you're ushered into this apartment, and there's Martin Scorsese with a video camera filming you. As you walk in, and as he's talking to you, I was completely intimidated by the whole thing, and I kind of resorted into the shy thing, and I couldn't really say that much or
right.
Do much, and it was God, doesn't he know how off-putting this is? I guess he was well, if you're going to be off-put by my little video camera, how are you going to feel with that? You get a 35mm camera, which I think is a false comparison, but I don't know what he was thinking.
Yeah.
So that was the only time I met him, and obviously I failed miserably, and I didn't get the job, and he never called me again.
Well, nothing really happened with him anyway after that, so it's just as well.
Well, at that point, I just wanted to work with anybody. I didn't care. Well, you look at, Scorsese films that just...
Huh?
I mean, there is an element, especially in his earlier films. No, I think all his films in which people's physicality,
sure,
physical reactions are really important.
Just look at, well, yeah, of course, you're right. I mean, all those De Niro movies. I mean, De Niro is you don't think of him, especially let's say through Raging Bull or sometime after that, as a very much more of a physical actor, not a verbal actor, for instance.
Right. Same thing with even though they're both brilliant at dialogue when it's required, you think of Brando.
Sure.
You know, he had a funny high voice, but he was such a physical presence, and he was so expressive both with his body and his face that your dialogue, as good as he was, and as good as some of the dialogue he had, I'm thinking of, the Tennessee Williams, Streetcar Named Desire,
right?
And
I was listening. I was just listening to this other podcast the other day. Interestingly enough, and how he became almost to the point of being unhireable because he made so many of these huge big budget Hollywood films that all flopped, so many in a row, that when it came time to cast Vito Corleone, he was nobody would hire him. And
who are you talking about?
Brando.
Who?
Brando.
Oh, you were talking about Brando? You did a podcast with Brando?
No, I was trying to say that all through the 60s into the beginning of the 70s, he was almost unhireable because he made so many big Hollywood flops that nobody went, that lost so much money that if Coppola hadn't taken a chance on him.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, there was an enormous surge because he made those movies and, of course, the Last Tango and all that. But anyway, it was just something I was listening to yesterday on another podcast. I think that's where you didn't hear what I said. And I was listening to this podcast. I was kind of talking about his career, and his life at the time.
Uh-huh.
Very interesting. Anyway.
Well, he had a very divided about feeling about Hollywood and Hollywood.
Oh, yeah, totally. You're right. Absolutely. Very much so.
I think less about the style and about the politics and the attitude about money and how much a business it was and how little
right
thought they gave to the artistic side of filmmaking.
Right. It was always so. It's always been that way, right? It's a business, right?
Yeah, I think there are some actors who were able to make that to fit right in.
Sure.
But I still think it was post-found. It was those that were very, I don't know if it's theater trained, but are very verbal and very excellent with the verbal side of filmmaking. I don't think it was until kind of the Europeans in the 50s and the Japanese that they showed at least the guys who were going to make the independent films, and from Kubrick and Cassavetes,
Altman a little later. Yeah.
Huh?
Robert Altman a little later.
Altman, early Scorsese, early Spielberg, Hal Ashby, all those 70s, even Friedkin.
Sure. Lumet.
Huh?
Sidney Lumet, yeah.
I said his was a lot of dialogue. I mean,
yeah,
kind of wall-to-wall dialogue. So I'm not. I mean, Sayles' movies were amazing.
Sure.
And you would ask me before what kind of movie. I was kind of very eclectic. I was not partial to any kind of movie until kind of the whole blockbuster thing, in the late 70s when Spielberg made Jaws and
Star Wars came out.
Lucas made Star Wars.
Right.
That things began to really shift. Like in the 70s, they really took a chance on these guys, Scorsese, Al Ashby, Altman. I know we're leaving out a whole bunch of guys that working in Scorsese. And it was also part of the cultural thing at that moment, coming out of the 60s, in which people were rebelling against everything, really.
Right.
And I think that was reflected in the films. I think the bosses were like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. Let's give these guys a chance. And they really did. And I still think that was the golden age of American movies.
I agree. But there was another, let's say, a silver period in the 80s let's say the mid to late 80s and went through into the 90s, where all of a sudden there were all these, a new generation of really hungry filmmakers like Jarmusch, Spike, a number of whom you ended up working with.
I would disagree with that assessment.
Okay. You're wrong, but you could feel free to talk about it.
Well,
it depends. It's generational too.
Huh?
It's kind of generational. I was talking to Esther Ballant. You may know her, and it's also kind of like Esther. Yeah, right. Exactly. Who? Sorry. And it's also like I just happened to come up at the time when those early Jarmusch, Hal Hartley, those movies kind of spoke directly to somebody like me because I was just hitting my 20s, and when those came out, they spoke to me, and so that's a big part of it too, Richard.
No, I can see that. I just think, from John, Do the Right Thing was more a studio film than an independent film. The size of the production, the cranes, the renting the street the whole time, the size of the crew, the names that he attracted, although they really wasn't big names. I was, John Turturro, Danny Aiello, Ruby Dee, Ossie Davis. But I guess that was kind of it in terms of names.
Yeah.
And so that didn't. I'm trying to think of these films that blew your mind. And what's his name? Ken, the guy from Jersey that did all the black and white films. Smith, what's his name?
Oh, Kevin Smith.
Kevin Smith.
No, that was a little later. The ones that really were very specific were like Hal Hartley, Whit Stillman. What's her name? Susan Seidelman, who made Desperate as You Can Susan, but that was her second film, and then Spike with She's Gotta Have It, specifically going back to his first real feature. It was those years, and then even
Coen Brothers.
Yes, Coen Brothers for sure. Absolutely.
Tarantino was
right.
Was a little later.
Yeah. So those films kind of really, right, with the Reservoir Dogs. These films can really kind of just, I don't know, they had a bigger impact, even though when I was growing up and I was a little younger, you're right, those movies, those guys, Friedkin and Spielberg, those guys were the movies that when I was a teenager. But when I was kind of coming into my own and forming my own identity as a young adult, those movies were just so, they spoke to me. And so that's why I kind of put it up as a silver age of film, but I, now I can, when I look back at everything, I'm totally on the same page as you. I still think those movies coming out of the studio system, and those young guys, and they were very they were somewhat inspired by the auteurs from Europe, like the French and Italian and Japanese filmmakers, and then we had an effect on them, on the Europeans with these filmmakers. American filmmakers ended up, so like this thing went back and forth for a while in the 60s and 70s, and so much great cinema came out of that whole period as a result.
Well, also. Not forgetting the Germans, Wim Wenders, and
who you worked with, right?
Fassbinder.
You worked with Wenders. Yeah,
3 times in fact. But I also worked John Sayles, who was
I was going to bring him up.
Independent filmmaker. Dialogue.
Well, you worked with him a few times too, but he was really on his own. He was like out there in the desert, where there was there weren't really anybody else, or very, very few filmmakers. There may have been a few on the out east, kind of making these independent films, like he was. Maybe Charles. There was Charles Burnett, and there's a few other people, just like filmmakers when John Sayles was doing it, because he was like almost 5, 6, 7 years before. This wave that we were just talking about with Spike.
Oh, really? When was Sokoc's 7?
That was 79, 80, I think. Somewhere around.
Okay, so it was kind of right in that period.
Yeah, just a little earlier.
What's David Lynch?
Right. Oh, yeah, my God, that's right. Oh, what a great... You never worked with him, though?
No, but the earlier... We were talking about the 70s guys, and we didn't mention Bob Rafelson.
Oh, my God, you're right. Of course, Bob Rafelson, incredible. Yeah.
That's great stuff.
You're right. Rafelson and Friedkin and Ashby, those are my go-to guys.
Yeah, and then, you're talking about guys like the Wild Bunch.
Are you talking about Peckinpah?
Yeah, Peckinpah. And he was kind of a real independent spirit.
True.
That worked, like Robert Altman, who kind of worked his way up through the Hollywood television world to become kind of real independently minded filmmakers within the Hollywood.
Right. And Woody Allen.
And Woody Allen. Woody Allen.
Yeah, can't leave out Woody Allen. But going back again, were you in the original lineup for Sonic Youth? Is that true?
True.
You were the drummer?
I did an interview with Thurston, and he goes, Richard Edson was one of the first drummers.
Oh.
Which was different than the first drummer.
What's wrong with him? Why would he say something like that?
Because he's pissed off that I quit the band.
When was this interview?
When did I read it? It was with him and Lydia Lunch at the, what was that name of that school out in Boulder, Colorado, that the Buddhist...
No, I don't know. I'm just wondering how many years later it was when he said that in the interview, like...
Much later. I think it was recently.
I mean, really? I mean, you're talking about 30 years ago, and he's still peeved? That makes no sense.
I know, but I think it's completely true. Whether it's my feeling or...
Yeah, your intuition says that. And, is that how you met...
Well, I know that was true for a long, long time.
Sure.
I didn't know why or why he was being such an asshole to me, but I think that was the reason. But somebody told me, somebody who was close to him at bitching and moaning.
Did you quit when you started making movies? What was the reason for or you started your own band, Conk?
No, I had the other band, Conk, and it was much closer to what I wanted to do, more like rhythm-based music that was drawing on funk and Latin and Brazilian, maybe even a little African, which is much more up my alley.
Sounds like Talking Heads.
Huh?
Sounds like Talking Heads.
Only from that Remain in Light album. I think that's the one you're thinking of.
Well, yeah, I guess it had a lot of, like, the African stuff started, like, being an element to it, but they were always very rhythmic and very, They were very rhythmic, but their rhythms tended to be more what I consider much more American, much more, like, sharp and abrasive, and they're kind of rolling groove rhythms that I like. Gotcha.
And that's what Conk was into, but it was a very non-experimental situation. I thought it would be, but it turned out that it wasn't, egos and personalities. And I love the experimental nature of Sonic Youth, but I couldn't really dedicate myself to that kind of music or their plan, which was basically taking on the road and just play nonstop, going around the country in a van. And they did that for about 5 years, from when I quit in 82 to about 87, when they got a record deal for Geffen, and then they came out with a couple albums that really put them on the map. And even now, thinking about spending 5 years going in a van around the country with Kim Thurston, and they're kind of straight-laced kind of guys, and a little too white for me.
I got you.
I mean,
you're a real hipster's hipster after all.
What?
You're the original hipster, right?
That's your word, not mine.
Okay, that's fair. And how did you meet Jarmusch? Was it the whole underground scene in New York?
No, kind of. He was playing in a band,
right?
Which was fun, but they were they really tall? There was
his brother?
There were 3 guys in the band, and they were very tall. The bass player and the other keyboard player, Jim, I think, played keyboard. It was kind of like dark, not psychedelic. It wasn't really punk, but it had a lot of energy. Anyway, we were all part of that same scene. There weren't that many clubs going on at that time. It was Pier Street. It was Mud Club, then Dance Interior, and a couple of little ones around town. And that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you went out, and that was it in terms of playing the kind of music we were doing downtown. And if you went out, you kept seeing the same people over and over. And the only reason I went out was to see music. I didn't drink, smoking a little reefer, but I think back that period, 1980 to 85. I don't think I went to sleep before 3 o'clock in the morning for one night. That entire time, I can't believe. I don't know where I ate, but I do know there was a couple Polish restaurants downtown.
Yeah, there was Kiev and
which one?
Kiev was down there.
Kiev was down there, but there were 2 on Avenue A. There was Leshko's.
Okay.
And another one. And I had so many breakfasts there.
They were open 24 hours, and you grab like French toast at 4 in the morning.
About 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock.
Right. Yeah. Did you go see Permanent Vacation, or did he show you Permanent Vacation, or did you know him already before?
I did see Permanent. But there was a healthy little scene with Scott and Beth B, Eric Mitchell, I think Charlie Ahern, a couple of female, Betty Gordon, Catherine Bigelow made a movie back then.
Yeah, she was also hanging out with Lizzie Borden, Catherine.
Yeah, I know Lizzie now. I worked with Catherine, and I got 2 stories, and they were very interesting stories.
Cool.
And the first one is the scene I did with Ray Fiennes. I think is the first film and the first real scene in the movie. It was before the first scene is somebody killing himself by jumping off a roof or falling off a roof, and the technology was kind of an immersive virtual reality thing in which you step into the mind of whoever is on the tape. And I was showing this to Ray.
Oh, right, yeah, of course. What was that called again? It's like a sci-fi movie. And what's her?
Strange Days.
Strange Days, right? And also Juliette. What's her face?
Juliette Lewis.
Juliette Lewis is in it. Yeah.
Ray Fiennes, Angela Bassett.
Of course, Angela Bassett.
What's his name? The guy that kind of flamed out, heroin addict. He's having a nice career too. Tough guy. He was in.
Not Mickey Rourke. No.
Not Mickey Rourke.
He didn't do heroin. He did everything else, probably.
I forget.
That was 1995. Were you in that?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Why would you talk about it otherwise?
Tom
Sizemore is who you were thinking of, right? Or Vincent.
Tom Sizemore.
And Vincent D'Onofrio, who also had a share of.
And Vincent D'Onofrio, and then another guy, and it was so much ego on that. These guys, it was so crazy. Except for Angela Bassett and Ray Fiennes, right?
They were nice. They were real. In other words, they were really nice. Oh my God,
They were nice and really professional.
I can't. I know you're going to tell me a good story, but I cannot imagine a movie with both Tom Sizemore, who is, by the way, one of the most appropriately named people I've ever heard of. His name is Sizemore, for God's sake. And then, but to him and D'Onofrio on the same movie, that must have been something.
D'Onofrio is another guy, just total egomaniac. The other side of egomania is, of course, or narcissism is like deep insecurity.
Sure. Well said.
So, and you can see, and there's a lot of drugs. People were doing a lot of drugs. And I won't mention any names.
We have.
But I didn't make any names about. I don't know if Sizemore, but he had an attitude. There's so much attitude. Let me say that. There's so much attitude, and Rafe didn't have an attitude, and Angela didn't have an attitude, but everybody else seemed to have. And Catherine was a doll. I really liked working with her, but I hate her for never giving me another job. No, that's not true.
Well, did you said you had you said you had a good story or a story from that?
Okay, so we did this scene,
mm-hmm.
and they usually shoot the lead first. So Rafe was they were shooting. We did the master, and then we started. They started to come in on Rafe, and they did 75 takes, and it were like 3 setups. or maybe 4 setups, where the camera moved to a different location. And for each setup, Catherine was doing 3 different lenses, or 4 different lenses, like a wide, closer, and really close. And, we're only about 10% into the interview.
I'm going to start a second podcast just for you.
Yeah, it's like the next 10. Okay, so Catherine, she was doing like multiple takes for each lens, for each setup. And I go to Catherine, why are you doing so many takes? I mean, this is so unusual. Some guys do 3 or 4 takes and then they're gone. And she was at 75 on him. And I said, why are you doing so many? And she said she wants to give the editor as much choice as possible. And I felt sympathy for the editor, because that's a lot of stuff to look through in order to find the best.
Amazing.
So she's probably better now. And it might have been because she was kind of starting out,
right?
Big budget movies, and she wanted to cover that.
I just rewatched Blue Steel, which I hadn't seen since it came out, but I kind of was curious because I remember liking it so much, and now it seemed very over the top in a lot of ways, with big performances in it. But I remember when it came out, I was very impressed.
I think that was her first kind of Hollywood film, correct?
Maybe, yeah, might have been, because then she made Point Break, and then Strange Days.
And then Strange Days, yeah. And
you said you had another...
which was a divorce, part of the divorce settlement with James Cameron, that he produced it.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, well, that's what I heard. Nothing I've said so far is true.
I hope not.
So anyway, okay, so the other story is that, like, while we're on the set, I always like to play chess.
You play chess? Chess?
Chess.
Okay.
It's a great way to pass the time, and it engages you. And I'm not really that good, but I still like to play, and I'm good enough so that I can beat people who don't know what the fuck they're doing. So I brought this, and I was talking to one of the producers, and I said, "You want to play chess?" And he played chess, but his style was very basic, and I beat him every time. Mm-hmm. And he did not like that at all. I thought, well, maybe I should let him win once, but I couldn't do that. I couldn't let him win.
Yeah, I understand. The competitive instinct in you was too strong.
Yeah, I didn't like the guy, so I'm like, fuck him. I'm just gonna, I'll just play the game. So Catherine would watch, and she was really fascinated, and she had no idea. She never played before. So I taught her how to play. Same thing. We're waiting for the setup, and really just spent a lot of time lighting and getting everything perfect. So we had time. I showed her how to play, and then I played her a game. I was like, damn, she picked this up really fast. She was doing some really creative stuff, and I was like very impressed that she could do that right away. And then she played the producer, and she beat him.
Oh, my God.
And now I don't think he ever forgave me. I mean, he wouldn't even talk to me anymore. But I had this really beautiful red leather jacket that I wore in the movie, and I was like, oh, man, I want to keep this. I like to keep, like, one bit of clothing from each movie. And usually they're like, no problem, And this movie was like a $90 million movie. I thought, even though it was a beautiful, expensive thing, $1,000, there would be no problem. I paid for it, appreciation for teaching Catherine how to play chess or whatever. But he was like, no, you can't have it. No, forget it. Don't even think about it. It's too expensive. And I think the reason why is because... Oh, sure.
He was gunning for you. Yeah.
He was gunning for me.
Yeah. Fucking asshole. Well, he's not welcome on the podcast. That's.
No, I don't know what happened. And it was kind of a mousy little guy. I was like, how does he get to be how did he get...
Napoleon complex.
Strong positions.
Well, money.
Producers aren't really that, on-set producers are not really that, they have nothing to do, really, except, well, you're taking too much time. Or like, no,
right.
we can't add this prop to the set because it's going to cost too much money. And usually the directors go, fuck you, I'm going to do it anyway. And so I'm going to talk to my bosses at the studio. They go, well, I don't care who you talk to, I'm still going to do it. So I don't know if he had a Napoleon complex or just was completely insecure.
They usually, as you said before, go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I want to squeeze in a few questions about a couple of people you've worked with a few times, like Barry Levinson. Was it just one movie with him, or did you do more than one movie with him?
I did one movie with him, and then an episode of, what was the name? He did the...
Right,
huh?
I forgot that. Right, he had the series in Baltimore, of course.
He had a series in Baltimore where he grew up.
Right. But you were in Good Morning Vietnam.
I was in Good Morning. He was wonderful to work for. He was really wonderful.
He was on this podcast, by the way.
Huh?
He was on the podcast.
And he likes to talk. He's a really good talker. Mm-hmm. His storytelling is amazing. I don't know. Did he get into that?
I didn't have a lot of time. With him. But he was a great guest, and it was like a specific film, which wasn't even something that he's probably that proud of.
Uh-huh.
But I of course jumped at it because it's Barry Levinson. The guy made Tin Man and Diner and Good Morning Vietnam, right? So it's like you're not going to say no. But did you have scenes? I forget, with Robin Williams.
Well, he was in it. He was wonderful to work with too. He was great because he was very generous. Like all the scenes we did, I did a scene with him alone. Oh, this is a funny story too. The scenes we were in was like group scenes, and he would just sit back and let us do our thing, and then pipe up every now and then, and just kill everybody, and then he'd shut up again, and let us do our thing, and he was a great guy, and he was just fun to be around. Although with that movie, he was on all the time.
Right.
If you show up at 6:30 in the morning, you're half asleep, and you go morning, Rob. And he'd do 20 minutes on you saying good morning to him. And the entire crew would gather around, and they would be be laughing at everything he's saying. And all you're thinking, I'm thinking, I just want to get to my dressing room and wake up.
Wow.
So I would sneak away, even though the whole thing was based on you saying good morning. I'd sneak away, and he'd just keep on going, and
that's amazing.
Get the crew all hysterical. And
that's funny. That's something you don't. That's the kind of truth a lot of people don't know about. Somebody who's maybe still very brilliant, but like when they're on, you can't turn the switch off. They're the only ones who have access to that switch.
Well, yeah, I think that's a professional or personality quirk of.
Yeah, sure.
Of comedians.
Absolutely. John Sayles, last year when I went to South by Southwest, he was there. This was planned ahead of time, but he was staying at a friend's, which only turned out to be very close to where I was staying. So I got to sit with him for, he gave me over an hour for the podcast. So there is a John Sayles episode, which is, he's actually been on twice, but he was on for like an hour, and we had a really great long talk.
He's great. He's a great guy.
8 Men Out.
Guy.
You did 8 Men Out.
Yeah.
And you did Sunshine State.
Sunshine State. And he was responsible, which I'm not sure I thank him now, or blame him, for doing a TV show called Shannon's Deal, which got me on Hollywood.
Oh, right.
I was the regular. We did it for a year and a half. It was going good. And the story there is that we were just finding ourselves as a group, and I guess this is true of a lot of television, where you have to do it for a year or so.
Sure.
Everybody understands what they are, who they are, and
sure.
how everything's going to blend together. And then Brandon Tartikoff, who was the head of CBS at the time. Yeah.
Was it CBS or NBC?
And he took his little baby.
He what?
And this was his baby.
Oh, right.
This was at the time. This was right after Twin Peaks. So it was like, well, I want to do my show with a established film director.
Oh,
and
okay.
Let's get the show, and we'll run with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how John Sayles got, at least that's my understanding of how John Sayles got into television. He did the pilot, and then he kind of oversaw the rest of the show. I think we did like 11 or 12, spread over 2 half seasons.
It was 11 episodes. Maybe that doesn't include a pilot, but with Jamie Sheridan.
That's pretty close, right?
Huh?
That was pretty close. I said 12.
Yeah. No, you're right on. Jamie Sheridan. I remember it. It was a very good show. And the late Elizabeth Peña. Yeah.
And the woman who played the daughter.
Oh.
She was 12. She became a pretty well-known pop singer.
Yeah, Jenny Lewis. Yeah, I didn't realize she was on that. Yeah, she's
a little at the time.
Yeah. That's right. That's the Jenny Lewis who's... I was talking to Sayles about... I brought up Elizabeth Peña because when I met with him, it was not that long before. Maybe it was 6 months after she died. So I brought her up, which I don't usually do, but...
Who died?
Elizabeth...
John Sayles died?
No.
John Sayles died?
Don't keep saying it. Elizabeth Peña.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, that was a sad story.
Very sad. Yeah.
I think she started drinking a lot.
Well, obviously, yeah. She must have. She had to have some real unresolved stuff. I mean, I can only guess because it seems usually the case.
Yeah. She's great. Wonderful woman. But I remember she liked to smoke a lot of pot. Oh, yeah? And maybe, I don't know what happened. I mean, we lost touch. I see her every now and then. She's a wonderful, Cuban. She told me stories about how they escaped Cuba. Her father was a pretty important guy up in the Castro government, and then he ran out of favor, like within the first year, and he had to sneak out of Cuba one night, and they were separated from him for a year or so, and then they snuck out. And that's how they got to America. I think she had been 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that. So maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah, it's like one of those things which...
She's a strong woman.
Yeah, no doubt. It's undiscerning alcohol. It takes whoever it takes,